Ladies and gentlemen, I am indeed honored to be here today. Thank you for this very, very warm welcome. I really like to thank the rector of the university, Gianmario Verona, and above all you, President Mario Monti. The works and the efforts and the achievements of Mario Monti is, of course, known everywhere, here in Italy, but also in the rest of Europe. But for me, Mario Monti is first and foremost an illustrious predecessor who has shown the way for so much of what we do today in competition enforcement, to keep markets open, to give businesses a fair chance of making it. Grazie mille, Professor Monti. Grazie mille, magnifico rettore. I'm afraid that's as far as my Italian goes. I thought about continuing in Danish, now tempted by the linguistic remarks of Mario Monti. It seemed a bit unfair, because Danish can seem like a bit of a strange language. Let me give you an example. For a Dane, the word skat means something like darling, dearest, my loved one. But you use it when you talk with your spouse or your children, but the word skat in Danish also means taxes. To some degree, it may make sense when you think about that the word literally means treasure, a little bit like tesoro in Italian. But it still might make the Danes sort of the only nation in the world who talks about tax in terms of endearment. Because let's be open about it. Paying tax is no one's idea of fun. But that being said, I think each and every one understand why paying taxes is important. We know that the taxes that we pay, well, they pay for the things that makes a decent society. A society with roads, railroads, digital infrastructure, schools for our children, care for the elderly, and a welfare system that protects us from the uncertainties of life. So, paying taxes depend on some sort of unspoken agreement, a social contract, if you like. We pay our taxes. In return, we expect a fair deal. And we also expect that everyone makes a fair contribution. So our governments can provide the services that we expect. And so they don't have to come back and ask to pay more, just because others are not paying their fair share. And I think that is why all the stories in recent years, from LuxLeaks and SwissLeaks, from Panama Paper to Paradise Papers, why these stories have produced so much anger throughout Europe. Because people, everyone, has just been through a period of crisis where governments have had to raise taxes, cut back on services. And now we see that people, well, the people who can most afford to pay, they have been using loopholes in the tax system to escape from paying taxes. We see that the rich, the powerful, they don't seem to think that the social contract applies to them. So it's no surprise that Europeans want to see change. And the European Commission has a responsibility to be part of the delivery of that change. For the last 3 years, under the leadership of Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, my colleague Pierre Moscovici has been leading the work to close loopholes in Europe's tax laws. The first proposal we made only 4 months after coming into office. The proposal dealt with what was central in the LuxLeaks. It dealt with tax rulings. A tax ruling is not at all a bad thing in itself. Corporate tax can be very complex. So of course it helps for a company to get certainty in advance, to be able to ask tax authorities, how will these rules apply in my specific situation? The problem is that sometimes those decisions apply a way of helping companies to avoid taxes. So the first proposal, which has now been enforced from 1st of January this year, provides for European tax authorities to exchange information on tax rulings automatically. So they know exactly what is the tax history of this company I'm dealing with in the other countries where they have activities. Since then, a whole series of new rules have become our laws. Large multinationals now have to tell tax authorities about the taxes they pay in each country and their activities in that country, so that our authorities can spot companies that may not be paying taxes where they make their profits. And from 2019, a new anti-tax avoidance directive will close a whole series of loopholes that companies use to avoid taxation, so that EU tax authorities can collect some of those 50 billion euros they lose in tax avoidance each year. But the effect of public budgets, well, that's not the only issue with tax avoidance, because special tax benefits also harm competition. When governments hand out subsidies to favored companies, well, then competition doesn't work the way it should. It becomes hard for other businesses to compete on equal terms, even if their product may serve people better. More affordable prices, better quality. It means that when businesses battle, they may not battle to meet consumers' needs. They battle to get a bigger subsidy. And it makes no difference if this subsidy is a handout in cash or a special tax treatment that means that a company pays less tax than its rivals. And this is no secret. It has been around for some time, and it's certainly not a secret to Mario Monti. He was Competition Commissioner in 2001 when the Commission investigated more than a dozen tax schemes all over Europe. And it found that several of them were harming competition. Because what they did was to give multinationals special ways to work out the tax that they had to pay, ways that benefited them and were not available to their rivals. So everyone knew that this sort of arrangements could be illegal. What we didn't know until a few years ago was that it was still going on. Not openly this time, but quietly, in the form of tax rulings. And then, 2013, the secrets started to come out. The US Senate looked into Apple's tax affair. The British Parliament studied Starbucks and Amazon. And the Commission decided that it was time to look again. Since then, we have asked every member state of our union to explain how it uses tax rulings. We have looked in detail in rulings from 23 countries, the 23 countries that uses tax rulings. We have followed up information from the LuxLeaks publication, and we're looking into whether we need to do the same in the Paradise Papers. Altogether, we have looked into more than 1,000 tax rulings. And the good news is that we have found that most of them, well, they do not give special benefits. But in a few cases, they've been used to hand out a preferred tax treatment to selected companies only. Some of those cases have involved transfer prices. That's the prices for a transaction within or between companies that are in the same group. When you run a standalone company, and we have a lot of standalone companies in Europe, well, the price of what you buy and the price of what you sell depends on the competition in the market. And your profit is just based on market prices. But for a group of companies, it's not that simple. Goods move from one part of the company to another part of the company within the group. Intellectual property that's owned by one company could be used by many others in the same group. And of course, none of those transactions are done in the market. So to work out the company's profits, you need to put a price, a transfer price, on each transaction within the group. Deciding on those transfer prices, well, that can be complex. So it makes sense to get a tax ruling, to get a confirmation that you've done it right. But exactly that complexity also leaves room to manipulate those prices and to use prices that do not match economic reality to shift profits around. So a decade ago, a full decade ago, the European Court confirmed that when it comes to tax, transfer prices should be in line with the prices in the market with free competition. So they reflect the economic reality of the situation and allows standalone companies to compete with companies in a holding. And in the cases like Starbucks and Amazon, we have taken action against transfer prices that didn't match economic reality. We have also looked closely at tax ruling that gives special benefits to financing companies. Those companies make loans to other parts of the group. The company that borrows money can deduct the interest from its profits, and that's of course fine, because the financing company pays tax on the interest that they receive. In 2002, it turned out that Luxembourg had agreed to tax these companies on just a tiny fixed part of the loans they made. The margin was just 0.1%. It was far less than any bank would accept as profit on a loan, and way out of line with economic reality. So the Commission, again, in Mario Monti's time, decided that it was illegal state aid. But when we look at tax rulings, more than a decade later, we found that this issue hadn't gone away. Some countries were giving tax rulings that accepted very low profits. So we've had to explain to governments in member states that tax rulings approving those tiny profits of financing companies could give those companies state aid. We were also concerned about the rules in the UK that give financing companies an exemption from rules against tax avoidance. And this is why, just last month, we opened an investigation into those rules in the UK. The last couple of years, we've taken action in a series of cases. We have found that Apple and Amazon, Fiat and Starbucks, and more than 35 multinationals in Belgium all have been given illegal state aid. So they'll have to pay it back, in some 40 billion euros in total. And our work is not over yet. As well as our investigation into financing companies in the UK, we're still looking at whether Luxembourg are giving or have given illegal state aid to McDonald's and Engie. And we will keep opening investigations whenever there are indications that state aid has been granted. And there's still a lot of work to do to close loopholes in our tax laws. Intermediaries, like accountants, law firms, banks, can be deeply involved in setting up arrangements that can be used to avoid taxes. We have seen the role very clearly from the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers as well. So in June, we proposed new rules that would make intermediaries tell tax authorities about those arrangements. And we have relaunched a project called the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base. And this is a project to close loopholes between tax systems in the European Union by providing a standard to calculate taxable profits throughout Europe, simplifying things for standalone companies, making it more difficult for multinationals to find loopholes. But in the end, this is not just about new laws. This is about a new culture. We need a new culture. One where tax authorities take responsibility for making sure that everyone pays their fair share of taxes. Where powerful companies do not get special deals. Where there's no reason for any company to put money and time into coming up with clever ways to go around the rules. And that change of culture, it doesn't happen just because we have new rules. You need national governments to implement them, to take responsibility for making this become a new reality. And the good news is that things slowly but surely are starting to change. Many companies are getting more careful about the way they deal with tax rulings. Every new corporate tax ruling in Luxembourg now has to go to a tax ruling committee before it can be granted. We've heard that Ireland is looking into all the tax rulings that were granted to companies before 2012. And in the Netherlands, when it turned out that a ruling found in the Paradise Paper were given without following the proper procedure, the government responded at once. It's now checking more than 4,000 cross-border tax rulings given in line with those rules. So governments are also improving the way they deal with financing companies. In January, Luxembourg made changes to its rules so those tax companies and profits more closely reflect economic reality. In July, Cyprus made similar changes to their own rules. And it makes me glad that member states take these initiatives. We enjoy working closely with them, but it's on the member state initiative that we change. And this is not all. Just to finalize a short look into the future. Because many governments are going back to first principles. They are asking whether they are really taxing the profits that governments are making in their country. Here, in Italy, the tax authorities have been looking into whether Apple and Google have paid all the taxes they should. That's led to the government reclaiming more than 300 million euros from each of them. And Italy has also joined France, Spain, and Germany in asking whether digital companies do pay their fair share. Because our tax system is not set up to deal with digital businesses properly. A system that looks at a company's physical assets to decide where it should be taxed Well, it faces problems in an age when you can easily do business in a country without any physical presence at all. Commissioner Margrethe and his team, they've done a lot of work to find ways to deal with this. And it's an issue that affects governments around the world, so of course this is also an international matter. We work with the OECD. We hope to find international agreement, but we're also willing to table proposals for the EU only. Because we need to act now. This is our opportunity to make taxation fair, to renew the social contract. This is our opportunity to make sure that national budgets can cope with all the challenges of us getting older, challenges in the way that we work. It's an opportunity to make competition in Europe fairer, so our markets work for everyone, and not just for the companies who get the biggest subsidies. And most importantly, it's an opportunity to restore people's trust, their confidence that everyone in the society is making a contribution, that the rich and the powerful are not playing them for fools. Closing the loopholes in our tax system will help. But people also need proof to see that our tax systems are fair. In spring last year, we proposed to introduce public country-by-country reporting, meaning that multinationals would publish what tax they pay in each EU country and what activities they have there. So the public can see for themselves if those companies are paying taxes where they make their profits. I do hope that national governments, that every member state will help us to do this, to restore the trust, because that then each citizen can see if taxes are actually being paid. We have come a long way in 3 years. Culture is changing in tax authorities, among businesses. And now we need to show in a way that the public can see. I don't think that people will start to love paying taxes, but it's not so hard when you see that it is for everyone to do it. So every time you do pay, you know that you're part of a community, without exception, to make a contribution. One could ask, why say this on such a day, on opening the academic year at Bocconi University? Well, here leadership is formed. Leaders are formed within the law, economics, societal studies. It's your society. It's your social contract. With your leadership, well, you can make knowledge matter because you can put that knowledge into action. Thank you very much.